What does the word trust mean to you?
Well, trust is, I think it's an action more than anything else. It's the actions that provide a foundation for credibility, for communication. Uh, with that, is honesty. So trust to me manifests in so many different ways. But really, when I think about it, it is the underpinning of success in your interpersonal relationships. It is the pathway to progress in your professional life. And most importantly, I think individually, you have to trust yourself. So you can look at this word in so many different ways, but for me, it has been so meaningful personally, professionally, and spiritually.
You brought up three concepts there, which I really like. You said the underpinning of our success. You said it's the path to progress and it's self-trust. Let's start with the first one. What do you mean when you say it's the underpinning of our success?
Well, trust, right? If we're really defining what that looks like as an underpinning, to me specifically, it means like it is everything, all roads lead back to this concept. When I think about, this idea of a pathway to professional success, right? I've spent some time in the NBA overseeing communications departments for the Golden State Warriors, for the Brooklyn Nets. Now, in my role at NYU, I lead a department which oversees the instruction, the curriculum, the student experience, and the professor experience, right? So, in order to, have an effective organization and to encourage behaviors that ultimately serve the stakeholders we're meant to, there needs to be that trust from either a leader's perspective to who you're managing, or there needs to be that trust in the culture that is going to support creatives' ability to be entrepreneurial in their endeavors. So, from a management perspective, encoding that sort of trust, that ability to, um, run out whatever it needs to be done to accomplish that common purpose is really, I think, what I'm speaking to when I say that from a professional standpoint.
Mm. And you brought up the idea of self-trust. Do you think self-trust is necessary to be able to encode trust in others?
Yes. Yes, because, we talk a lot about this concept of authenticity, what it means to be your true self, what it means to really step into the power of your role, whether it's professionally or personally, just your ability to show up as you. And with that comes these things of sometimes self-doubt or imposter syndrome, right? In every level of where you're at, whether you're a student navigating academia and it's competitive and it's difficult and it's a step up from what you're used to, or you're an early stage professional navigating that first, full-time position in an organization where you're working with, different generations of people with different levels of experience. It's really easy to have that imposter syndrome creep
Mm.
in and for you to question, am I good enough, am I smart enough, am I prepared enough? And a big part of that is figuring out how to step away from the doubt and step into that trusting of your ability, right? If you're in this room and you made it to this level, then that is something that you should take and really be proud of and continue to step into. So, trusting yourself to show up as the most authentic version of you, whether that's personal or professional, is really that first step to unlocking potential. I think personally and professionally, to be really authentic in who you are and be honest in what you need to thrive in these situations, and to just, again, trust yourself to be able to effectuate that progress in whatever lane that is.
It does seem hard to trust ourselves when we're in the unknown. When I say this, I mean when we enter new settings where maybe we don't have the credibility, like you said, we're in the early phase of our professional side or even our educational side, it's so hard to actually believe in ourselves when we haven't got the background to show it, the resume to show it, let's say. How can I build trust in myself, belief in myself that I can actually every day, step onto that field, give 100%.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Rishi, because for me, I feel like there's always going to be external influences that forge doubt as to why you should be there. Right. So whether it's
Mm,
something as simple as, navigating, your junior year of university, or you're in your first full-time job and it feels competitive and you feel like you lack that institutional knowledge, I think it's very easy to find reasons to doubt yourself. And this concept of, you brought it up, like maybe I don't have enough experience. At every stage of my career, whether it was my first full-time role with the Nets organization, or even coming in as, a first year assistant professor at NYU, I feel like it's very easy to doubt, your credentials and why you should be there. And you look to the left and the right, and kind of compare yourself against other people and their credentials. And that doesn't serve any purpose, because everyone has their own journey. Everyone
mm,
needs to step into their own progress. So I think really letting go of expectation as far as living up to the people that are sitting next to you, because it's a very superficial way to measure your own success. You need to really think about, how do I learn as much as I can? How do I garner that experience? And instead of comparing yourself to your environment, it's, how do I use that, this opportunity to find a mentor or to find an ally to help me navigate this new terrain? And that's going to help you build confidence. And that's going to help you layer in that trust of yourself and your abilities as you navigate uncertain environments.
what's that phrase? Comparison is the thief of joy. And it's funny.
Mm-hmm.
I tell everyone when I start this podcast, I always rely on the statistic. I think it's the 90% of starting podcasts don't reach episode 3. Then we have 99% of starting podcasts don't reach episode 20. And as I'm getting through this, I'm realizing like you the standard you set is always set by other people. It's so hard to set our own standards, and that's when I'm slowly realizing like, okay, I'm understanding why this guy's dropping out of a podcast. This guy's dropping out of a podcast. It's so hard to keep going when all you look around, because you're not going to see the people below you, right? They're not going to be the ones showing off their excellence. It's the people that have already made it that are showing their excellence. So it's so hard to keep up with that standard. How do I set the standard for myself? What are the key elements that I should be setting the standards?
Yeah, this is a really great question. I think we can, relate it to this example of, you're starting a podcast, you're establishing your voice, you're garnering support in the way of getting guests to come on. And I've got to tell you, to me, you've already done exactly what you needed to do, which is like, you're betting on yourself and your contributions that your voice could bring to the world, quite honestly. And it takes a lot of bravery and courage to put yourself out there, put your voice out there, put your thoughts out there. That is a courage that isn't often rewarded with kindness, because it's very easy for people to kind of take a look and be like, oh, well, there's how many people are listening to this podcast, or, oh, what could this person know at this stage, right? So that, to me, you put that to the side and you got your start. And that's the first thing to do. And I think now, trusting yourself to have consistency with this, to continue to show up for yourself. And every episode, there's going to be progress. So even if it's a few people listening the first time, even if it's, a few more people listening the next time, it is the ability to stick with it and to stay consistent and to stay patient, and knowing that you're building something, right? No one just steps out, new voice, and commands the attention of millions of people without some sort of credibility and contribution that warrants that sort of attention. So even like the most listened to podcasts, you can trace back that sort of visibility to things that these media personalities or thought leaders were working on for many, many years before. And it manifests in a way that rewards them with followership. So you've just got to stay true to the process, to have fidelity to, your ability to share something meaningful, which I believe every person has. Now it's the people that are going to be brave and courageous to continue to push through and build something over time, when a lot of people would never do it. And two, it's easy to be on the sidelines and scrutinize what other people are doing when they're putting themselves out there. So I would just say, continue to have that confidence, and that consistency to execute something that comes from here and really comes from here, because it goes back to the courage to share your voice and to share your thoughts.
Do you think bravery and courage are prerequisites to be able to trust ourselves?
Yeah. Yeah, I think bravery and courage shows up in different ways. One of the things I share quite often with some of my mentees about leadership styles is, when you're thinking about how to lead and how to garner followership or how to get things done, right? You need a collective of people to be working towards a common goal as a leader, as a manager, in order to get something done in any organization that is interconnected. So when I think about my leadership style and how I interact with people, I think it's a courage to be kind. Um, Oftentimes, people think you have to be strong and you have to be, you know, you have to encode a sense of maybe fear to lead, or this strength that shows that, you're going to kind of rule with an iron fist. And that's never felt good for me. That always felt like I would try to copy someone else that I saw in the organization. It just never felt like my style. So I always tell my mentees it's a courage to be kind when that is not always returned. And that's been
Mm.
like my leadership style, in that I try to work as often as possible collaboratively. When we're working towards a goal, that transparency, the bravery to socialize decision making, it's a lot easier to say, no, go get it done. That's what we're doing. That's your directive. And then there's no need for that two-way communication. But if you're going to, kind of take the veil down a little bit and give your team or give another person what they need to truly understand the rationale and decision making behind whether it's a directive or a decision that you have to make, that will affect their lives and their experience. That to me that's courage and bravery. When it's a
Mm.
lot easier just to take the shortcut and be like, no, this is what we're doing, this is how we're moving, go do it, and then that's it, right? So I
Mm.
do think bravery, courage, these elements, we don't really think of it oftentimes as being vulnerable. But vulnerability to me is a courage. And that's what I mean when I'm trying to, lead with kindness and kind of step into my authentic self, because being any other version is just not true to me.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned you have mentees and you've had mentors in the past. How do we find these mentors that we can trust? How long does it take to actually trust them?
Yeah, this is going to be different for everyone, right? I think when I define a true mentor, what does that look like? And it's someone that I, have come to over time, really respect, really trust. And how do you really know when that person is deserving of your trust, right? I had one mentor in particular who was my direct manager when I was at BSE Global working for the Brooklyn Nets organization. And just watching how she navigated different situations, seeing when she was tested in really difficult situations, it's easy to be reactive. It's easy to, kind of lose it and then unravel, especially when you're working for a multi-billion-dollar organization with real stakes. So, seeing how she reacted with kindness, with strength, with transactional communication that still helped other people function, especially during, difficult times. The respect that I had for her only exponentially grew throughout throughout my experience with her. So I would say that's how I found my mentor, where you continue to respect that person over time. It's easy to come out with like a great impression and you're like, oh, my boss is going to be amazing, or, this person is going to be a rock star. And then that consistency and that, the time kind of shows their weak spots and their blind spots. But when you have this slow burn of respect and admiration, and you want to emulate that person's style in how they react and how they uplift and how they work in teams, that's when you've found someone that could be your mentor, someone that is worthy of that adoration, and so much so that you want to be more like that person. And I think when I shared that, when I told her, I said, really and seriously, watching you, learning from you, has been transformative, because, I've never known anyone to be kind of the baddest person in the room, but also the kindest. And that was life changing for me, to be able to see that you can be both. You don't have to be a savage to be powerful. You can be authentic and kind, and you can listen and still be extremely powerful. So that's how I would say, got my first true mentor that was informative and really formative in how I began to step into my own leadership style, and really work towards approaching different situations with that sort of charisma and patience. On the mentee side, I think that young women in particular that are navigating rooms where they are underrepresented. Sometimes there's a set of experiences that are a departure from a man working in that same scope. So being there to listen to and validate experiences in especially young women that are navigating sport business careers, which is why I started the Women's Sport Collective at NYU, and why we kind of build these communities, because oftentimes they're seeking, how do I navigate all of these overlapping layers of, it's not just doing the job, but it's doing the job in underrepresented rooms, not knowing or not having a mentor or an ally to bounce ideas off of. And that journey could be really isolating. So I think, back to your question, Rishi, like, you have the idea of, how do you find a mentor, right? And that comes with time, and that comes with mutual respect. And that comes with understanding where you want to see yourself go, and then how can that relationship be mutually beneficial, right? How can then you support that person in what they do, right? Mentor mentee relationship is cyclical. And then giving back, right? If I hadn't been mentored by a number of people, not just this one person that I referenced, then the doors that I've stepped through, that were left open for me, I wouldn't be here, right? So to me, it's a give back thing. It's a, how do we make this industry a little bit kinder than when we stepped into it? So that's the reason why I have so many mentees, and not just female students, but a number that are now in industry, thriving, that have become peers and have become co-conspirators in what we're working towards to transform sport at NYU.
I like how you said when you found your mentor that you actually just watched how they performed under their own standards. It's not like you trusted them based on how they treated your relationship. I'm assuming that is a part to it. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not going to trust some random guy that treats me horribly. But I do like the fact that you said they were authentic to themselves, and that's what made me trust them. So is trust actually about, when you trust someone, do you think that foundation of trust actually relies on how they trust themselves rather than what they've contributed to our lives?
Yeah, I do. And I think I'm looking at it in this situation and I'm, imagining some of these situations in my head, some of these memories that I have of working with her and working closely with her. And, that is to me, that's like the X factor. It's one thing to trust yourself and move through your life in different lanes. It's another thing to trust yourself and make these decisions at such a wide level that other people are able to not just pick up on those, the ways you're moving, but where it comes from, right? It's going to be rare that you are in a boardroom or you're in a situation at work in your professional career where someone's going to be like, I trust myself, so therefore you should trust me. And this is, it doesn't happen. It is almost like um, a covert observation that you watch over time and you arrive at that conclusion. And I'm like, looking at her, I'm like, there's no way that she's able to make such vast affecting decisions, and she's able to manage so many different personalities up, down, laterally, interdepartmentally, without having a sense of self and really trusting not just who she is with her personality and the circle of concern that she's exhibited, but also her perspective, her lived experience, both in the organization and outside, and her ability to know what maybe she doesn't know, and then to seek the help that she might need to arrive at a decision or a directive. So really, trusting yourself is so multifaceted. So I've seen it manifest in a number of different ways, and that was a conclusion that a lot of people felt, where she really led by example. And it was nothing she ever said directly, but it was that body of experiences, of observation, that people around her came to trust. This is how, she knows what she's doing. So yeah, there's no doubt that that's an intrinsic thing, but it's never something you communicate externally. Like, hey, I trust me, so therefore you should too. Right? It's just it's something that takes time to really observe, and that consistency and the showing up every single day, day after day, year after year, and just doing your best.
You said it's a slow burn, and the reason I was so excited to talk trust with you is because I think it's such a, I'm not trying to be over dramatic, but it is a beautiful concept in the fact that it can be so fragile, by the same time it can be so strong because we can trust people when we set up an expectation, and sometimes they constantly come short of our expectations, but we keep trusting them. But then there's other times when no matter how much they've reached our expectations, one small shortcoming can shatter our trust. How do I build a long lasting trust with someone? Because you said it's a slow burn, but there's times when I feel like, all right, if I mess up one time, I am finished. Like, this guy doesn't trust me anymore. How do I build that long lasting trust that despite my shortcomings of someone's expectation of me, I can still keep their trust in me?
Wow, this is very nuanced. It's a nuanced question because again, this is going to be so individual to the experience. But one thing that I agree that I feel like is relatively universal is that trust really takes a long time to build and it could take a second to break. And everyone has shortcomings. Everyone is going to make mistakes. Every single person, no one is perfect. So I think it's really important um, to continue to own your accountability. So here's what I mean by this. If you make a mistake, and you will, I certainly have. I do quite a bit. It's important to own that and to say, "Hey, I know I didn't quite hit the mark here, or I know I could have done this better. Here's what I'm going to do differently next time." So I think that accountability and that is leadership in action. That makes someone trustworthy because the expectation. right? Because expectations are dangerous. You might have an expectation of someone else to perform at a certain level or to do something, right? But really, you can't control other people's behaviors and what they contribute, even if it's someone you trust, respect, and admire that you've known for a long time. There's going to be a time where that's tested, right? Especially the longevity in a relationship. No one's going to be a 10 out of 10 perfect, firing on all cylinders. At every time, that could be for a number of reasons. That could be they're burnt out, or they just don't have the bandwidth, or they're focused on something else, or they're not, or they're sick, right? Or they're just not an interest, right? That could be for any number of reasons that the outcome is the outcome. But I always look at intentions. When someone falls short of an expectation that I set, why is it? And I can ultimately only control my behavior and my reaction to that. So I think with trust and with expectations, it is it's difficult to manage other people's contributions, what they do, how they show up, even if you trust them. What's important is to be realistic and to provide grace and and that ability for them to recover safely and kind of keep moving, right? That is really important as someone that is a leader, as someone that has experience in, no one's ever going to, again, hit every mark every single time, but allowing them the space to recover, to own it, and to learn from it. That's how you continue to build that trust. And on the other hand, I'm also a big believer in we teach people how to treat us. There are certain situations where um, you have to know your boundaries. And some people will reveal themselves in a way that is so counter to what you believe in foundationally, your code of ethics and morality. And that's when you know you need to kind of step back and think about that, what that relationship looks like going forward.
You were one of the first women to lead both football and corporate communications. The reason I'll bring this up is to enter a space which is typically run by men or typically where women aren't as welcome, you definitely needed a lot of belief in you. Like, that's not just a normal thing. So, when was the moment that you knew that you had people believing in you?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So this is interesting, right? The NFL is over a 100-year brand in the American football space. There have been different spring leagues that have popped up over time that have been a complementary alternative to this, and in this entire body of time. There's only been one woman prior to the start of the XFL in 2019 that had overseen an entire football communications department, which is to me it's not a badge of honor that I was the second to do it. It's kind of it's more so sad because it is indicative of the space and the culture and the opportunities that are there. So part of the reason why I left the NBA after spending almost 10 years, really happy in my career, thriving, loving basketball really the most, to take on this role as head of communications for this new spring football league was to bet on myself, stretch myself in a way that I never had before. And part of it, and it almost feels silly to say it, but part of it was I wanted to prove that I could do it to myself. And I wanted to have this opportunity as a pathway to show that women can not just be in these roles, but thrive in these roles. And there should be more. There should be more representation. So that was really the rationale behind taking on that role. And I remember, talking to the team that hired me, and they said, "Look, like football is a different animal. You haven't worked in football before, so and you're going to be managing a football department. You've got to be cognizant of what that means." Now, reading between the lines, how I took that was you're walking into a locker room of 50 plus men. Um, you're going to have almost 70 football players are going to report to training camp. We're going to get that roster down to under 55. Then you're going to have an entire room of coaches and trainers that maybe one had never worked with women in this space or have been working in football for so long that women were just not in there, and it wasn't a testament to who they were. It's just like this is a new situation. Football is a sport where the culture is one where you're in it, you know it, and that's how you gain your trust and respect. You're lacking that. That's not something that you have right now. It's something that you're going to need to work towards. So, despite the advanced degrees and the over 10 years of managing locker rooms and the tried and true vouching for my abilities by colleagues that kind of hired me and brought me into this space, you're still going to have to prove yourself again. So, that to me was a challenge. It was something that I took very seriously, and it was something that I really wanted to make happen. And you never really know, like, when they start really trusting you. But one example of that really being established was when we we were, I guess, now 9 or 10 months into our relationship. I've been in the locker room with the team every single practice, every single. Now we're playing games. We're showing up, and these guys are like fighting for their lives. They're putting their bodies on the line. The coaches, they all are there to essentially to prove something. Oftentimes it's they want to get back to the NFL, or they want to have this one precious chance of really professionalizing their careers. So they're working towards, it's so much bigger than just going out and playing a game and making money. It was, we need to be successful in this space because this might be our last chance. So when the stakes are so high and you have this sort of influence over their experience in this space, there needs to be that trust in order for it all to work. So I remember we had this one game, and the cameras were always in the locker rooms, meaning the whole value proposition of the XFL during this time was unprecedented access, bringing the fan closer to football than ever before, doing things that the NFL could never dream about. So that means miking up players, allowing that to go live over the broadcast, having those cameras in the locker rooms to show this real, authentic, raw version of these players and coaches. And so I would be listening to the broadcast throughout the entire game, something that the players and coaches weren't, and I'd kind of get a feel for some of the narratives that were coming out of that and what they might be asked by the media immediately after the game. So I just remember the coach or head coach was Kevin Gilbride, and he had won 2 Super Bowls. He was Eli Manning's quarterback coach, and was one of the most like legendary coaches in the game. And he took on this role, and he was my counterpart. And I remember right after the game, he looked at me and he's like, "Is there anything I should know heading into this? What do you like? Can we talk for 2 minutes?" And I said, "Yeah, here are the things that you might be asked." And he was like, "How do you think I should manage this point?" And it almost was like a crazy moment, because you have one of the people that you really respect the most that has this thread of credibility at every level of football and for 40 plus years, and here he is deferring to a first year communications director because of that trust and mutual respect. And I think that's a long journey to explain that one moment. But it goes to speak that goes to show that you really have to show up every single day. You're in the locker rooms with the guys. You're there. You're writing game notes. You're prepping. You're managing, and you never really know. You never really have a temperature for how people perceive you, especially if you're so focused on your self doubt of what you don't have. So I had to really unburden myself from the expectations of what other people wanted of me and trust my experience and my ability to establish trust with people, whether that's a coach, a general manager, or a player, to help them to their benefit to operate more effectively. So that moment when they defer to you and they ask you, hey, what should I do? It's because you've established that trust and you have that line of credibility where you haven't led them astray before. And in an important moment where they're seeking either feedback or an affirmation of the direction where they think they're going to take it, that to me is trust in action.
Mm. I mean, by the way, is there anything better than prime television and watching brute, angry men mic'd up? I mean, sounds like my Saturday afternoon dream. But what was the feeling like of getting asked by the coach, be like, "Yo, your opinion matters to me. All right, I'm gonna take this into my press conference to talk about my players. You're the first year. Give me your opinion." What is that feeling like, though?
It's just a confirmation. It's a validation of your abilities. And I would never recommend anyone to thrive off of external validation, but like we'd be lying
Mm.
if we said it didn't feel good sometimes. So yeah, that's that moment. That felt really good. Yeah.
I like what you just said. Can you expand on that? You don't want people to actually thrive on external validation, but at some point we do want external validation, right? I'm not gonna go years or like for me to continue this podcast, for example, I do need at times like someone to tell me, "Yo, at least you're doing the right thing." But what do you mean you don't want people to actually thrive on external validation?
Yeah, I think it's funny, like, working in public relations and strategic communications for such a long time, and helping to garner kind of that positive press in the media over whether it's the athletes I'm working with or the organization. Um, when we get something good, right, written about us, and sometimes something is more critical, right? You live kind of with that up and down. I'd always tell my constituents internally when we got a piece of good press, for instance, um, I'd say, "That's great. It's a great thing, but never believe your own press." And that's something that I take with me to keep me right here, even keel. If people are around you, like externally validating you and saying, oh, they're so great, they're so amazing, then like the expectation becomes all the way up here. And each time you have to live up to this, standard. And when something is a little bit more critical, or, you have a piece of bad press in the example that I've used, or something that was more critical that was out there written about your organization, then you get really low and you're like, oh, now we need to be reactive and try to fix this. And oftentimes it is just a matter of staying in keel, of knowing that the good and the bad is going to come, but the one constant you can control is how you react, and to believe in your strategy. So I look at that from a personal perspective as well. Whereas when people are giving you commendations and affirming your abilities, that is great. But when you start to really believe it and you rest on that, that's when you get complacent. That's when you're like, oh well, I already have a great reputation. I've done a lot. I'm gonna just kind of keep coasting right here. And that's not good if you have a growth mindset and you want to constantly try to improve and continue to create value in new ways. So thriving on that external validation all the time or some of the time, it gets dangerous because then you're not doing it for the true fidelity to your common purpose. You're doing it to please others, what others, believe you should be doing. And that goes back to authenticity and trusting yourself. I haven't met one critically successful person professionally that hasn't been challenged, scrutinized, and especially when you get to a certain level of visibility, people want to, you have a target on your back. People want to point out the things that, they feel like they could do better that you're not doing. So to me, looking for that external validation is not something that should be a part of like a regular wheelhouse. Like I think it's important to have, mentors and to have someone that you can go to and be like, hey, I need a real gut check here. you know like, how did what do you think I could have done better, or how do you think that this is, what's the pulse here? So that's really an important part of it, because you can't be listening to all of the noise and have that influence how you show up or what you do, because that's a detriment to who you are and your ability to be consistent in your roles.
There's a study by Martin Seligman, who's a psychologist. I'm not bringing this up randomly. I will connect it back. But he looked at this study where he analyzed three groups of dogs, and it's a bit of a messed up study. But the first group of dogs was shocked with an electrocutor, and they gave them a lever, and when they switched it, the shocking would stop. The second group of dogs, same thing, they were shocked, but the lever this time was a fraud. So even if they flipped it, it wouldn't work. And the third group was a control group. I'm pretty sure they didn't get shocked at all. And after they did this part, they put them into a final phase where they put all the dogs in one side of the room with a fence blocking off the other side of the room. And then they shocked this one side of the room. And the reason I bring this up is the one group of dogs that didn't have trust in their lever or resources, they were the only group that didn't make an effort to leave that side of the room. The other dogs actually jumped over that fence. Now, it's a bit of a weird study to bring up, but the reason I bring it up is the foundation of our ability to take action relies in our ability to trust in our resources. And what you're telling me is external validation is great. Tell me if I'm misquoting here, but the foundation of our actually ability to keep progressing relies in our authenticity and ability to trust in our resources.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think that depending on how you define resources, resources can be, the team that you have and the trust that you've established. Sometimes a small and mighty team that has will have high value to you, and it's better than having a giant staff, right? Because you're able to work
Mm.
lean. Sometimes autonomy and being able to make your own decisions and trust your own ability is going to be a resource. Sometimes resources are what sort of budget and is provided to you to really work through whatever it is your project or task is. So I think being well resourced is going to be highly dependent on what the common purpose is and what you're trying to achieve, and really what your value system is. And based off of the example that you gave, I think it's funny because the some of you that see my background see a dog coming in and out. He's actually a research beagle that was tested on in a situation very similar to that, and that's not something you knew, Rishi, but I was like, oh my gosh, we could kind of redirect the conversation here and talk about that. But yeah, I don't advocate for testing on animals to
Obviously not.
to
That's
figure out
horrific. That was one of the worst
resources.
studies I saw. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, but I mean, you do also have this other role when I first ever saw you at NYU and you talked about it, which is you helped athletes prepare for interviews or for the press. And the reason I bring this up is you helped a lot of athletes actually gain trust from the press during their interviews or press conferences. Can you explain how you did that?
Yeah, I think like now with social media and with a news cycle truly being 24/7, and the person could be under a microscope at all times. It's not just like, 15, 20 years ago. It was, you really had to wait until that moment during media availability to share what you're about and who you are. Whereas, and then that message was mediated through the eyes and the perspective and lens of someone else. Now, with this digital convergence and this opportunity to go directly to your external stakeholders, excuse me, you have an opportunity, but it could also be to your detriment to just say whatever you want whenever you want, however you want, through whatever medium. So this goes back to you cannot control what anyone does, but you can try to share best practices and potential consequences in a way that's approachable and in a way that fully socializes the risk versus the benefit.
Mm.
So when I've worked with athletes, whether that's NBA athletes, whether that is football athletes, soccer, excuse me, fighters, I've worked in boxing, I've worked in UFC. Um, it all comes back to having the ability to lean on your experience and say, what are you trying to accomplish here? Like, what are your goals? If your goal is to continue to establish your brand, every single time you step in front of the camera, you post on social media, you do a traditional or non-traditional interview, you're on a podcast, how are you encoding your personality? Right. And some people want to be a little bit more and are a little bit more quirky and loud and fun. Some people want to be like more polished and want to be looked at as, you know, calm and cool and collected, right? It all depends on that person's understanding of who they are and how they want to be perceived externally. So I always tell them, look, like any chance you get to be and to share who you are you reaffirming with consistency the characteristics that you want to be known for? And then when I understand what those are, I'll help give them tips like to just to how to manage that. So it's not here's what to say, here's how to script you. It is if I'm facilitating an interview, am I making sure that they're prepared, or am I putting them on a journalist completely cold, which I would never do. So like what are you actually going to talk about? Like, what is the subject of this interview, right? If I just kind of showed up on this podcast and I had no idea what we were talking about, and all of a sudden I'm blindsided about the
Mm.
topics, then I'm not going to react as favorably, right? Because I don't know where we're going. However, you did a great job in saying, hey, here's what I want to talk about. Let's have this
Appreciate
conversation.
it.
We did a pre interview, right? It's the same thing. It's setting up that person for success to be their true, authentic self, to not be blindsided, and to not expose themselves in a way that could hurt their brand or create controversy around them. So it all comes back to managing, for potential risks. In this case, not being exposed in a way where they understand what the expectation is of them, ensuring that they have enough time to showcase their true authentic self. So some athletes I've worked with, they're fine doing an interview pre-game or from the sidelines right before they're about to play. That's not the case for everyone. So I would never facilitate, an interview opportunity where they would be where time was scarce, and it would force them to not really be as intentional with what they're sharing. So again, it's like knowing your athletes or your coaches or your executives. I've worked with a lot of different groups of people on media training, and it's understanding what are you trying to accomplish, and how do you reaffirm who you are through external kind of mediated opportunities to showcase your true authentic self. So every strategy is going to be different.
Is it difficult though? For example, when you're helping football players or let's say fighters who've just come out of a fight, they are gleaming with adrenaline. Like they are probably the most authentic, or probably actually, I don't know, but they're at least giving them their like a raw feeling after the fight. How do you still provide their authentic self, a trustworthy version of themselves, while still filtering out some of the garbage that they may spew? And I'm not saying in a bad way, just because you obviously don't want media to take in some of their characteristics and twist it. But how do you make sure their authentic self is given and is trustworthy while keeping a filtered version of them?
Yeah, every sport's different. And really having worked in boxing and mixed martial arts, and then an American football property that was live mics at all times, versus the NBA, which has a curated media availability. And that's the reason why there are, kind of media access rules, is because it could be, detrimental to the brand if the athletes are coming out the second that they're done, and you go from this like adrenaline heat of the moment, and you're just kind of on this, on this high, and emotions are high, and it doesn't always serve the athlete or the brand to have that sort of raw exposure the minute the game ends, which is why there's media access, which is why there are times where media can actually go to players to get that information, because 15 minutes after the game, I can assure you, when locker rooms are open, there is still ripe with color for interpretation. So I think this goes back to upholding the policies that are set in place for these different sport properties to not overexpose the players during a time where they're more vulnerable, which could be right after a fight. And with properties like UFC or some of the boxing cards I've worked on, they do have an opportunity to kind of cool down after their fight. They go back to medical, they make sure everything's okay, then they kind of filter out, and hopefully they've reconciled a lot of that fight and flight response, so that they could think more clearly and share more accordingly. However, if you've ever watched like a weigh-in ceremonial or a promotion for a fight, the expectations for personalities to come out are a little bit different than some of the legacy big four leagues in North America. Again, different expectations. So I always just try to provide situations and facilitate access during a time where their true authentic self comes into play, but not to the point where they're overexposed.
By the way, when I watch boxing, I think the weigh-ins are one of my favorite. It's weird because normally, like in other sports, you wouldn't actually sit down and watch like a non-game related event, but the weigh-in is one of the coolest events for me just because you get to see these two people head on, and 90% of the time, at least the ones I watch, they're already fighting. Like it is so cool to watch. Can I bring it back to the part of trusting the people around us? There's a bit of a personal question. I don't know how you want to take it on, but do you think you over trust or under trust? Do you think there is a Goldilocks period of trusting, or do you think there's just a line that you get to be on, or is it subjective? Where is the over trust or under trust, or where is the Goldilocks period of trusting?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, I mentioned this a little bit earlier when we were talking about understanding your own boundaries, and we teach people how to treat us. So I think for my way and where I'm comfortable is, I will give you the bandwidth and the latitude to and the benefit of the doubt to be trusted. And if that relationship is a little bit shorter and the time is a little bit like, we don't have an established relationship, I'm going to be very closely observing how you utilize that opportunity. And I'm going to manage accordingly the next time we interact. If you show me that you don't value that trust and latitude. So again, that comes back to a personal boundary where I absolutely know my limits and my comfort, and my default is going to be to allow that person to show up in the way that they would normally, and there's a power to that, because you can kind of quickly get to and arrive at where that person stands in a lot of ways. And then you manage that accordingly. So it's not going to be one size fits all, but I would say from a personal perspective, I really try to give that trust and that space to do whatever it is, why we're in the room together, why we're put together, why we need to kind of have that trust to work. And then I'm going to adjust if there is a need to. So I don't mind getting a little uncomfortable or getting burned, because in my experience, most people value the trust in the space, and especially if they have perspective, they tend to really respect that. Otherwise, if you don't, then I'm gonna manage accordingly, and it's gonna be a personal boundary.
The reason I asked that question was I have a weird baseline when it comes to trust, and maybe you have this a similar one from what you're saying is, but I tend to overtrust people in the beginning, and then my conscious awareness that I overtrust people then for not forces me, but I feel like then I lose trust in them, or I become very aware that all right, look, I've put a lot of trust in this person, it's bound to break. Do you think we should go into conversations or when we meet people, we should go in with a high baseline of trust or a low baseline of trust? Do you think trust is earned?
Yeah, trust is certainly earned. But I think this goes back to what you're personally comfortable with, right? If your default is to kind of give that latitude and then see the reaction, then that's your comfort level. Or how you perceive the world, what your experiences have socialized you into how you interact with people, how you view people. Everyone has a different set of experiences and thus a different comfort level into establishing new relationships. So I think it's highly dependent on your worldview, your past experiences, and how much time you actually have to establish a relationship with that person and thus build that trust.
Mm, so, to wrap it up, Professor Antoniello, I've been asking all my guests this. You can go as deep as you want. What is the best advice you've ever been given?
Wow. It's a really, really great question. And I've been very, very lucky to have a lot of great mentors and a lot of amazing people that have been in my corner and have helped me with their wisdom over the years. So it's really, really difficult to narrow it down to any one thing. But I think the most important and formative advice that several people have given me throughout my career would really just to be um, work really, really hard and be a good human. Now that sounds very straightforward, but sometimes the simplest things are the best explanation. Um,
Mm,
and what did that mean to me? Number one, work hard. That to me has been the hallmark of my ability to navigate different echelons of my career and have enjoyed this, upward mobility in my career at a young age. Um, but I'm not going to let anyone outwork me. I am going to work really, really hard, no matter what credential or what level I have gotten to. That work ethic is going to be unmatched, and I'm going to consistently show up every single day, and I'm going to continue to work. And with that sort of mindset and mindset in action, it's very difficult for people to edge you in that regard when you are just going to be consistent and your level is going to be a level 10 when it comes to your work ethic. And especially when you prioritize something and you're putting everything into that, to me, energy will breed outcomes. And that's something that I feel like has been very, very useful to me over my career. So it was really good advice, but it was something that is also very much intrinsic. You can't, I don't think you can teach that. I think you can um, repeat, I think you can establish behaviors that will make you successful. But to have that work ethic that is so ferocious and so consistent over time and is relentless, you can get that advice, but if you're going to take it and then put it into action is a whole other thing. And then be a good human, that doesn't need much of an explanation. Default to kindness where possible, and I think you can find reasons to do that in almost every situation. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Be the type of person that you would want to be on the receiving end of. I think all of the things that you learn in kindergarten, sharing is caring, be nice, play nice, right? These are the things that just really, really matter and really affect other people's experiences. And I have found that staying true to who I am and my morals and values and treating people with respect and decency and kindness has served me very, very well. And it's a part of who I am and who I continue to be, even if that isn't matched, even if that isn't received. I'm not going to change who I am, and I'm going to continue to try to put really good, positive things in the world and empower other people to have, to lead with that courage of kindness and respect for others. So I would, and I do share this with all of my students and my mentees, and just work hard and be a good human.
Work hard and be a good human. Love it. Professor Antoniello, thank you for coming on today. It means the absolute world. And I'll see you hopefully soon.
Thank you, Rishi, and good luck with this. This is a very, very cool project, and you have so much to contribute. So look forward to following along in this journey and supporting in whatever way I can.